So this lesson, learn CSS Colors by building a set of colored markers. So this is a continuation of the previous lessons we've been doing off of freeCodeCamp's responsive web design course. This is a free course for anybody looking to start web development or coding or wanting to learn about building an application. There's all sorts of uses for web development. It's not just to build a website, but the programming that we'll learn later on in the JavaScript section will definitely help us in understanding the potential that programming gives us. Okay, so let's go ahead and start right now. And we'll start with lesson 1, but we're going to be selecting the correct colors for a web page to help improve the aesthetic appeal to our readers. In this course, we'll build a set of colored markers. We'll learn different ways to set colors and how to pair colors with each other. Let's go ahead and start this. So there's a preview of what we will build. CSS color markers. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, that's all it tells us. Let's get to coding. So starting, let's see, this is still live. It's live, mic's on, everything's good. So step 1. As you've seen in previous projects, web pages should start with the doctype HTML declaration followed by an HTML element. Add a doctype HTML declaration at the top of the document and an HTML element after that. Give the HTML element a lang attribute with en as its value. Let's do that here. Oh, line 1. So I think it's something like doctype HTML. I might be wrong, but it'll let us know. Here we have an opening HTML tag, closing, and inside our HTML we're giving it an attribute, language or lang, and the value of it is en for English. Let's see if that works. We do pass that. Let's go to the next one. So if any of this is new to you, make sure to watch these courses that I put together from the beginning, and you should see an end card at the end of the video, or in the beginning of the video you'll see a link to the playlist that this course is a part of. And if you see those all together, it would be probably a lot more helpful. Step 2 says nest a head element within the HTML element. Just after the head element, add a body element. So we're inside of line 3, but we're inside of our HTML element, and in there we're doing a head and a body. So opening and closing head, and then opening and closing body. Let's run this. We do pass. Let's continue. Step 3, remember that the title element gives search engines extra information about the page. It also tells browsers what text to display in the title bar when the page is open and on the tab for the page. Within the head element, nest a title element with the text colored markers. So we're going into the head, which is line 3 and 4, and we're going to nest a title element in the head. Let's do that here, opening and closing. And it's going to have the text colored markers. Okay, so we're actually able to run that. And we pass. Let us continue. Step 4. To tell browsers how to encode characters on your page, set the charset to UTF-8. UTF-8 is a universal character set that includes almost every character from all human languages. Inside the head element, nest a meta element with the attribute charset set to UTF-8. Remember that meta elements are self-closing and do not need a closing tag. Okay, so in the head, we're doing a meta tag that doesn't require a closing, so let's do that here. And in it, we're giving it a charset with value UTF-8. So attribute charset and value UTF-8. Let's run this. And we do pass. Let's go to the next one. Step 5 says, add another self-closing meta element within the head. Give it a name attribute set to viewport and a content attribute set to width equals device width and initial scale 1.0. So your page looks the same on all devices. So adding another self-closing meta element within the head. So this is the head, and we're doing another meta. Doesn't matter if it's at the top, bottom, middle, I'm just adding it here. It's self-closing. We're going to give it the name attribute set to viewport. And we're going to do content attribute and assign to it. We can just copy this and paste it into the value here. And let's run this. And we could go to the next one. We passed. Step 6 says, now you're ready to start adding content to your page. Within your body, nest an H1 element with the text CSS color marker. So let's just copy that. And in the body, we're doing H1. And in there, we're pasting in CSS color markers. Let's run it. We pass. 7 says, in this project, you'll work with an external CSS file to style the page. We've already created a styles.css file for you, but before you can use it, you'll need to link to the page. Nest a link element within the head, give it a rel attribute set to style sheet and an href attribute set to styles.css. So again, they created the file over here, and in order to access it, we're going to have to use a link element and link to that file. Let's do that under our title. Again, it doesn't matter where you put it, I just decided to put it here. Link. And we're giving our link rel attribute with style sheet. And then href set to point to that file. So doing this will help us link to this file so that we can utilize any styles that we create in our styles file. We could use that in our index.html. So let's check it. We pass. Next one. As a reminder, here's how to target a paragraph element and align it to the right. So we select the paragraph and we're telling it to text align to the right. So create a new CSS rule that targets H1 element and sets its text align property to center. So that should grab our H1 from our index.html and it should center it if we do it right. So let's do that here. H1. And then what we want to do is text align center. Okay, and you see it works even without the space here. Just looks a little cleaner to have the space. Let's go ahead and check it. And we do pass. 9 says, now you'll add some elements that you'll eventually style into color markers. First, within the body, add a div element and set its class attribute to container. So in the body, add a div element and set its class attribute to container. Make sure the div element is below the H1. Okay, so under the H1, div class attribute container, and then close the div. Run this. We pass. Now 10 says, next within the div, add another div element and give it a class of marker. So in the div, within it, we're doing another div with a class of marker. Close out our div. Run it. We passed. Step 11 says it's time to add some color to the page. Remember that one way to add color to an element is to use the color keyword like black, cyan, or yellow. As a reminder, here's how to target the class freeCodeCamp. So we're targeting the class called freeCodeCamp, and we're asked to create a new CSS row that targets the class marker and sets its background color property to red. Let's do that right here. That's selecting the marker class, and we're giving it a background color. And we're doing red. And then let's check our code. And we did pass. Let's go to the next lesson. Step 12 says, notice that the marker doesn't seem to have any color. The background color was actually applied, but since the marker div element is empty, it doesn't have any height by default. In your .marker CSS rule, set the width property to 200 pixels and the height property to 25 pixels. So under our background color, or above it, doesn't matter, we're doing a width property of 200 pixels. And the height property of 25 pixels. And now we do see our rectangle here, or our marker. Let's go ahead and check our code. We did pass. Continue. Your marker would look better if it was centered on the page. An easy way to do that is with the margin shorthand property. In the last project, you set the margin area of elements separately with properties like margin top, margin left. The margin shorthand property makes it easy to set multiple margin areas at the same time. To center your marker on the page, set its marker property to auto. This sets margin top, margin right, margin bottom, margin left, all to auto. So let's do that. Again, I can add it at the top of these or at the bottom. I'm adding it under background color just cause. So we're going to give a margin of auto. And as it's mentioning, this works whereas in last lesson we used margin top just to target the top, margin right just to target the right margin. We're able to just say margin, and it's going to apply it to all four margin top, margin right, margin left, margin bottom. Just a easier, cleaner way of doing it. Save some code. So let's check it. We pass. Then we have step 14 that says, now that you've got one marker centered with color, it's time to add the other markers. In the container div, add 2 more div elements and give them each a class of marker. So where's our container? Here's our container. Our container has one div element with the class marker inside of it. They want us to add 2 more of those inside our container. And you can tell it's inside the container because we have the indentations. And again, those aren't necessary, but they help us visually know, okay, the marker is inside of the container. So let's copy this marker and create 2 more of them. Here we do 1 more and 1 more, and we got 3. And you can't tell, but they're there. It's just that they're all red, so you can't see any lines or anything. Let's check our code. We do pass. Let's go to the next one. Step 15 says, while you have 3 separate marker div elements, they look like one big rectangle. You should add some space between them to make it easier to see each element. When the shorthand margin property has 2 values, it sets margin top and margin bottom to the first value and margin left and margin right to the second value. In your dot marker CSS rule, set the margin property to 10 pixels and auto. So margin, we're just going to do 10 pixels before the auto. Okay, so let's run that. And we pass. So let me just explain this one. We gave it 2 options. The first option is going to target margin top and margin bottom. The second, so 10 pixels is being applied to margin top and margin bottom, and then the second value, the auto, is being applied to margin left and margin right. Okay, so just keep that in mind when using margin, padding, things like that. Just know that the first value is going to apply to the top and bottom, and the second value will be applied to left and right. So let's go to the next one. Step 16 says, to give the markers different colors, you'll need to add a unique class to each one. Multiple classes can be added to an element by listing them in the class attribute and separating them with a space. For example, the following adds both the animal and dog class to a div element. So here we have div with a class animal and dog. To begin, add the class 1 to the first marker div element. So here's our first marker at the top here in line 12. We could just add space and 1. Run it. We pass. Step 17. Next, remove the background color property and its value from the dot marker CSS rule. So let's erase this. From within the dot marker class, we could run it. Pass. Then create a new CSS rule that targets the class 1 and set its background color property to red. So we select 1 and we're going to apply to the .1 CSS class. We're going to do background color red. Run it. And we see that it got applied because we do have in our index HTML, we have that one marker with the class of 1. So the red only applies to that first marker. So let's continue. We pass, go to the next one. Add the class 2 to the second marker div and the class 3 to the third marker div. Let's do that here. Run it. Pass. Next one, create a CSS rule that targets the class 2 and sets its background color property to green. Also create a separate CSS rule that targets the class 3 and sets its background color to blue. Let's do that real quick. Okay, check it. We pass. 21 says there are 2 main color models, the additive Rgb, red, green, blue, model used in electronic devices, and the subtractive CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, black, model used in print. In this project, you'll work with Rgb model. This means that colors begin as black and change as different levels of red, green, and blue are introduced. An easy way to see this is with the CSS Rgb function. Create a new CSS rule that targets the class container and set its background color to black with Rgb 000. Let's do that here. Targeting container class and giving it background color Rgb 000. And we do see that applied. Let's check it. Forgot my semicolon, but whatever. So go to the next one. Step 22, a function is a piece of code that can take an input and perform a specific action. The CSS Rgb function accepts values or arguments for red, green, and blue and produces a color. So Rgb, the first one is a level of red, level of green, level of blue. So each red, green, and blue value is a number from 0 to 255. 0 means that there's 0% of that color and is black. 255 means that there's 100% of that color. In the .1 CSS rule, replace the color keyword red with the Rgb function. For the Rgb function, set the value for red to 255, the value of green and blue to 0. So let's do that here. Erase this. We're doing Rgb 255 0 0, and we see it is red. And that's because we're giving it 100% red and then 0% the other ones. We could check it. We pass. Next one says, notice that the background color for your marker is still red. This is because you set the red value of the Rgb function to the max of 255 or 100% red and set both the green and blue values to 0. Now use the Rgb function to set the other colors. In the .2 CSS rule, Rgb functions will be, in the .2 CSS rule, use the Rgb function to set the background color to the max value of green and 0 for the other values. And in the .3 CSS rule, use the Rgb function to set the background color to the max value of blue and 0 to the for the other values. So we erase this. We add Rgb. We're doing 0 red. And is the second one green? G is green, so 255, and then 0 this one, and then we do see green, and then for blue we're going to do Rgb 0 0 255, and that should work. We do pass. Next lesson. 24, while the red and blue markers look the same, the green one is much lighter than it was before. I didn't even notice. This is because the green color keyword is actually a darker shade and is about halfway between black and the maximum value for green. In the .2 CSS rule, set the green value in the Rgb function to 127 to lower its intensity. So instead of 255, 127, because we're changing the green value in the Rgb. 1, 2, and 7. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, so check the code. We pass. 25. Now add a little more vertical space between your markers and the edge of the container element they're in. So in the .container CSS rule, use the shorthand padding property to add 10 pixels of top and bottom. Let me see over here. I lost my place. In the .container CSS rule, use the shorthand padding property to add 10 pixels at the top and bottom padding and set the left and right padding to 0. This works similarly to the shorthand margin property. Okay, so we remember that. So in our container class, we're adding padding. And we know top and bottom is the first one, so we're going to make that one 10 pixels, top and bottom. And left and right to 0. Let's see if this worked. We did pass. Okay. Step 26 says, in the additive Rgb color model, primary colors are colors that when combined create pure green. Let me see, where is it? In the additive RGB color model, primary colors are colors that when combined create pure white. But for this to happen, each color needs to be at its highest intensity. Before you combine colors, set the green marker back to pure green for the Rgb function in the .toCSS rule. Set green back to the max value of 255. So they want us to do this and do 255, and that made the green the highest intensity, or 100% green. Okay, we submit. Step 27 says, now that you have primary RGB colors, it's time to combine them. For the Rgb function in the dot container rule, set the red, green, and blue to the max of 255. So in our container, they want us to make all these 255. Okay, and that gave us white because we set them to their full intensity. We do pass. 28 says, secondary colors are the colors you get when you combine primary colors. You might have noticed some secondary colors in the last step as you changed the red, green, and blue values. To create the first secondary color, yellow, update the Rgb function in the .1CSS rule to combine pure red and pure green. So we'll add 255 here. And we do see it turned yellow. Let's run that. We do pass. Next. To create the next secondary color, cyan, update the Rgb function in the .toCSS rule to combine pure green and pure blue. So there's that pure green, we're doing pure blue, and we do get cyan. We do pass. 30. To create the final secondary color, magenta, update the Rgb function in the 3CSS rule to combine pure blue and pure red. There's blue, pure red would be the first one, and we get magenta. We pass, go to the next one. Now that you're familiar with secondary colors, you'll learn how to create, what is that, tertiary colors? I feel blind, I can't see that. Yeah, let's say tertiary colors. Tertiary colors are created by combining a primary with a nearby secondary color. To create the tertiary color orange, update the Rgb function in the .1CSS rule so that red is at the max value and set green to 127. If you guys know if I'm pronouncing that wrong, let me know in the comments. But we're going to create that color orange by updating Rgb function in the .1, set the max value, red's at the max, and we set green to 127. So we're doing this one because the G is the second one, 127. And we get orange. Check it. We do pass. Go to the next one. Notice that to create orange, you have to increase the intensity of red and decrease the intensity of green Rgb values. This is because orange is the combination of red and yellow and falls between the two colors on the color wheel. To create the tertiary colors, spring green, combine cyan with green. Update the Rgb function in the .toCSS rule so that green is at the max value and set blue to 127. So green's at max value of 255, so that's 100% intensity. And then the blue is going down to 127. And we do see that update. And we do pass that. 33 says, and to create the tertiary color violet, combine magenta with blue, update the Rgb function in the .3CSS rule so that blue is at the max value and set red to 127. So we're in the .3 class and we're blue is at max value. So we want blue over here and it's at max value, and red to 127. So here's red, and we're doing 127, and we do get that purple, magenta, or violet, right? Yeah, that's violet. So let's submit, go to the next one. 34, there are 3 more tertiary colors. Chartreuse, I guess. I don't know what that is. Green, which is green plus yellow. Azure, blue plus cyan. And rose, red plus magenta. To create Chartreuse Green, update the Rgb function in the .1 rule so that red is at 127 and set green to max value. So red, green, blue, so 255. Red is 127. Wait, I messed up. So here's one. Red's at 127 and set green to the max value. Oh yeah, I think that's right. Okay, for Azure, update the Rgb function in the .2 rule so that green's at 127 and blue's at max. So that's for the second one. Green is 127 and blue's at max. Okay. And for rose, which is sometimes called bright pink, update the Rgb function in the .3 rule so that blue's at 127 and red's at max. So let's do this, max. And blue's at 127. And it's that rose color. Cool. So that should pass. We do. 35. Now that you've gone through all the primary, secondary, tertiary colors on a color wheel, it'll be easy to understand other color theory concepts and how they impact design. First, in the rules, .1, .2, and .3, adjust the values in Rgb function so that the background color of each element is set to pure black. Remember that the Rgb function uses the additive color model where colors start as black and change as the values of red, green, and blue increase. So background color is set to pure black. They want us to do pure black? Just the values. Alright, I think I'm reading this wrong, but alright, let me check it. Yeah, I guess that is what they wanted. Okay. Step 36. A color wheel is a circle where similar colors or hues are near each other and different ones are farther apart. For example, pure red is between the hues rose and orange. 2 colors that are opposites from each other on the color wheel are called complementary colors. If 2 complementary colors are combined, they produce gray. But when they are placed side by side, these colors produce strong visual contrast. Brighter. In the Rgb function, for the .1 CSS rule, set the red value to max of 255 to produce pure red in the Rgb function. For .2 CSS rule, set the value to green and blue to the max of 255 to produce cyan. Okay, so again,